I'm going to try and briefly summarize and pull together the points that you made before we start the discussion. I'll try and be very brief. Firstly, thanks, Louis, for, in true historical fashion, giving us a foundation by laying out the situation, or describing the situation we now face, the state of play, the character of this moment, because mobilizing knowledge and implementing it doesn't happen in a vacuum. And the present historical moment has particular characteristics that we need to understand, because that's the field in which we operate. And it's very true, the tensions you spoke about, or between local and global, Melissa also alluded to that. I mean, that's always present, but at this moment, it's particularly pertinent, because everybody, even in countries of the global south where I do my research, everybody's aware of global issues. Even in the last village, people know about global issues. And yet they have their local concerns, they have their own ways of approaching things, they have their own power constellations, power structures, and so on, and cultural and historical circumstances that will qualify the way they respond to those global issues. Also, the tension between individual and institutions. Clearly, the credibility of a lot of institutions has suffered, and also the credibility of experts. So, and part of the reason is the kind of media landscape we now live in, and Lucilla mentioned about science communication. Sure, I mean, we've had now, depending on how you look at it, 50 years or 20 years of intense messaging from science that there is a crisis, that action needs to be taken urgently, that time is running out, and so on. And it is slowly sinking through. It is reaching different target audiences. Maybe not to the extent that they are willing to take immediate action and contemplate radical change, but a lot is happening. I mentioned yesterday the financial industry is now really, the investment industry is now really moving to change money flows in the direction of sustainable technologies, for example. But science communication is tricky in this age of social media. We all know about fake news. It's very difficult to I think Louis mentioned the sort of failure of socializing a particular shared knowledge, a consensus, a common ground. So there's a lot of division. Everybody can maintain their views, no matter how exotic they might be, and they will find others who agree with them on the internet. And science has to try and break through that. And I think it's good that younger generations of scientists use social media, but it's an uphill battle. And I wanted to mention one experiment that I had a little involvement in, called The Conversation, which is a news outlet that began in Australia. I was involved in the discussions with the founding editor, Andrew Jaspin, I don't know, some 15 years ago. I don't exactly remember, but not that long ago. And it started with a little bit of funding from major universities to be a sort of an outlet for news from science. It reached, in the beginning only academics, but now it's, after a while it was millions of people in Australia, and then it went international. Now it's tens of millions of people who read this. You could call it a online newspaper, a daily newspaper every day. So huge audience, huge impact, and other media outlets pick up on these news items. So it's a great success story. Very little funding, carries itself now, but there need to be, these sorts of experiments must be tried in outreach. Very, very important. Okay, but now I'm going to open the floor to questions. We had some on the chat already, but I encourage more questions. One was by R.B. Singh, who's the head of the International Geographical Union. And he asks, how can we involve local institutions more in finding solutions to the SDGs? I think all three of our speakers can respond to that. So maybe, Luis, would you like to start, perhaps on the basis of your local engagement?
Sure. Thank you very much, Thomas, for the question. I think this is actually a very important question, and it relates to our strategy, how to mobilize things. In my view, for a long time, I don't believe that major transformation will come from top-down and global strategies, although I think they are very important. So I think all the efforts made on climate, on whatever, everything that is done in terms of the SDGs and so on is positive. Having said that, it's insufficient, it's biased, and it will not bring transformation. So how can this be done? I think only by, on one hand, helping structuring local, strong projects that engage the communities with a clear scientific backbone. I would like to stress this. I think we all agree, if we listen to all the interventions this morning, but also yesterday, those that I could follow, the idea of bottom-up is, I would say, a common trend for all of us. As the need for outreach is also something we all talk about. But I think also we should stress that humanities and sciences are fundamental as the backbone of this transformation. This is why I mentioned they should not be dissolved in other types of understandings, which are very important, but they are not, again, sufficiently transformative. Okay. It is the merge. And in that respect, if we help doing that, and if we help federating the different initiatives, then this can become a tide. This can become a tsunami. I think this is why, for example, with other people, I'm involved in this project with UNESCO of creating the project bridges. Not again that the project itself will solve anything, but federating is important. FLA is about that. The International Year of Global Understanding is about that. And that's what we need to do. And in that level, local institutions are not only possible players, but they are the key players. So they're much more important than any of our global structure, I would say, including CIPS. If we believe really in transformation, we have to believe in where people are living, and that's in places. It's not in the global.
Yes, very good point. I think also it's important to empower local actors. And again, we come back to the funding matter. If you look at the structural issues there about the way, say, tax revenue is distributed to different layers of government, you often see that local government is indebted, doesn't have the financial means to run with some of those great ideas. So I think there's some change required there. But I wanted to now ask Melissa to say a few words about this issue, Melissa, because she also stressed very much the importance of local action, the need to understand diversity at that level. If you'd like to, perhaps you have some examples from your, engagement as in a development institute.
No, absolutely, and this is an issue I feel very strongly about. So I agree with Luis that we have to start. Transformations have to begin from below, but they have to also connect with solidarities that are working at national and global levels as well. So I think I think there are some conditions for local institutions to be able to be effective, to have confidence, to have capacity. And those are partly about control over resources. They're partly about legitimacy, actually, in their own context. And I think one of the challenges that we're facing at the moment is that in country after country, the political space for local institutions to operate, whether it's local government or civil society, is often closing just at the time when we most need it to be open. So there are sort of political conditions for operation. And then in terms of science and research, yes, funding is really important. But also, and I think there, consortium projects of the kind that might well be funded by global institutions or those located in Europe and the US, but which are working in genuinely equitable partnerships, which are not just working with local institutions somehow to collect local data or bring a local perspective, but are actually genuinely bringing that local knowledge and set of perspectives into collaborative dialogue with others, are really important. And I think the other thing that I would add is that sometimes local institutions work most effectively when they are able to form into networks and alliances with each other, often transnationally. So just a couple of examples. One institution that we've been working with very closely at IDS in the context of cities and sustainability is SDI, which started as Slum Dwellers International, began often in women's low-income women's savings groups, but has now extended to be a locally based but transnationally federated structure of groups, campaigning and researching and collecting and sharing data about how to enable sustainability to work in low-income settlements throughout the world. And they've been incredibly active, for instance, in the response to COVID-19, both finding local solutions through neighborhood networks, through supporting people under lockdown, through actually knowing who the people who are facing challenges are, because they're often very invisible in local settlements, and then bringing that information to the attention of governments and then internationally. Another example would be, I think, some of the work going on in food systems, whether we're talking about the agroecology movement or food sovereignty movement, where you've often had small peasants organizations doing a combination of scholarship and activism in localities in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, but able to connect up with each other to put demands not just on governments, but then on the international community around major change. And then often linking up with organizations like IPES Food, the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, who can help broker and amplify their voices. So I think there are many examples, but resourcing is critical, political legitimacy is critical, and actually recognition of the perspectives that they can bring is also vital in debates which, as others have said, are both local and global at the same time.
Thank you, Melissa. I can only echo that sentiment. Sometimes people ask me, Thomas, you know that much about the sustainability crisis, you know about the obstacles, how can you sleep at night, and where do you get your hope from? And my answer is usually that I get my hope from what I see at the local level. And I've worked many years in Indonesia, including on food systems. And the hope I get comes from seeing, for example, farmers in Indonesia building networks and organizations at the local level of mutual aid in helping each other to shift back to regenerative agriculture and sustainable food systems that produce healthy food at an affordable price. So very social-minded and environmentally conscious as well at the same time. So that gives me hope, and it's real. Lucilla, would you like to also comment on this question briefly?
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Ben for the invitation to this amazing conference. I'm learning a lot, and I'm really enjoying it. And also to tell you that I'm a fan of the conversation. Is where I go to get the latest new ideas for papers and stuff. Concerning the issue of the local level, so we know that sustainable development is happening at the local level, but need to be reconciled at the global level. What I would like to highlight here, following also what Melissa said and what you said on the importance of networks, is that actually there are many mechanisms within the United Nations system that provide that framework. But most of the time, these networks and these possibilities are actually not known. Some were famous maybe a long time ago in the 70s, like the Ben and the Biosphere programs, which is the first program on sustainable development, which reconciled the local level through the Biosphere Reserve Network, where actually local people are engaged in experimenting with sustainable development, but also have a coordinating mechanism at the intergovernmental level in UNESCO, and they can bridge into the main also UNESCO policy and United Nations system. This is forgotten. We've sort of kind of left aside, but people are still working in Biosphere Reserve and doing excellent action at the local level. And some of you maybe are engaged in some of this project in Germany and in other countries. Then there is another system which I would like to highlight, which I experienced in my past duty at the International Council for Science, which is the major groups and other stakeholders, which is the civil society, non-state actors present at United Nations for Sustainable Development. It was a very interesting experience. I didn't know what it meant to be a stakeholder. None of you has mentioned the word stakeholder so far, and this is very interesting for me. I just published a book on this word, which is a little bit strange, and maybe it's a word that is abused when we don't know where to quote people. But in this mechanism, at the high-level political forum on sustainable development, the non-state actors, the members of society, those acting at the local level are actually represented. How they're represented is sometimes is not particularly easy to understand, but they're meant to build networks of civil society organization, of grassroots organization, of academics, of private sectors, that from the local level to national level, to regional level and global level can provide input into the global sustainability debate. These are not known. And that's why I think CIPS should actually try to break into this system in order to make sure that all of you that work on this type of project at IDS, there's so many projects, so many students also involved in this also international dimension, can actually filter this knowledge and this new and this innovation into maybe sometimes obsolete intergovernmental process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucilla. I wanted to give people here in this round here on site to have some comments. Hartmut, you put your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to come in at this point, if I may, and ask all of you about the conception of knowledge, because I'm a little concerned, or I think we should not make the mistake, at least not in the humanities and the social sciences, to think that we produce knowledge in the academia and the universities, and then we somehow have to transfer it, translate it, communicate it, disseminate it simply to the local level and to the people who then somehow implement it. Because what we do in the social sciences and in the humanities is to give interpretations of our situation, of our lifestyle. That's what we need when we want to go towards a sustainable development. So we need to understand our human predicament. What are our hopes, our fears? What is guiding, motivating our actions, and what are possible alternatives? So we need to come up with narratives of our predicament, and these narratives have to be produced in dialogue with people acting in diverse contexts. So knowledge is also produced. It's not just implemented and acted on the local level. The production of knowledge, I believe, needs to be a two-way process. That's what we try to do in the, or sometimes term in sociology, public sociology. It doesn't mean we give our knowledge to the people. It means we have to draw on their interpretation and knowledge in order to come up with the best account of our situation.
Yes, Martin, you wanted to comment also.
Yes, thank you very much. I also think there's often a co-production of knowledge, and it's produced by everybody who is part of the whole process. I have also a question a bit about, we have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and I would like to ask the people, is there a certain way to prioritize some, or to see what is more important? If we transfer knowledge in all fields, maybe that could produce, combined with money going into some of the goals, a very strong development on digitalization or something like this. And in the end, we had a very dangerous developments, which creates new conflicts, new wars, new a controlling society somewhere can be supported by this very easily. And is there, would like to ask the group, reflection to develop out of these 17 goals something which might become more related to the goal of sustainability in the end.
May I intervene about that, Thomas?
Sure, sure.
Okay, thank you. So, because I just wanted to come back to the statement made by Luis before on the SDGs, and I recognized his political cleverness when he said what is done on the SDGs is useful but insufficient and will not produce transformation. So I'm curious about what he finds useful about the SDGs. I will tell you what I find useful, but also about I think, a fundamental flow of the SDGs. And what I find useful is that, of course, more or less universal consensus at the political level about the issues, more than about the concept of sustainability, about consensus about the fact that there are a number of big issues in the future of humanity, some of them self-defeating for humanity, existential issues. That is useful to build upon that political consensus at the top level, even if it is only a matter of discourse and much less a matter of action in practical terms. But what I don't find useful, which is related to the last comment made, is that it is not a systemic perspective. A list of many things does not make a systemic perspective. Even a systematic list of many things, of many items, does not create a systemic perspective. And the SDGs are full of errors of logical type, addressing, different issues which are at different levels, different logical levels, in a way which actually almost, I don't know if it makes it impossible, but I think it's creates a lot of backfire if we pursue the method of developing the SDGs as they have been framed, also with, these 230 or whatever indicators, which is the very typical, this is an epistemology of splitting a whole into pieces. So we are again in classical mechanics, not in the epistemology of natural sciences today. We are in the epistemology of classical mechanics 2 centuries ago. And this is a fundamental flow that I think this conference has to address.
Okay. I agree with you, Carlos, from a purely epistemological perspective. There are many flaws in the SDG model, and it is a model. And it is, as Bateson said, it's the map, it's not the territory, it's not the actual thing itself. And I think it's very important to have research on transformations, particularly at the local level, that shows what people are doing, what can be done, and to get an empirical angle on the actual action that's happening, rather than trying to prescribe it centrally once again. And I'm actually involved in building a project that does that at the local level, through peer exchange between local actors across sectors on a digital platform, a global digital platform that does use models that help people sort of to think, well, what are the basic, the bases we need to cover roughly. But at the same time also ask, well, what other things do you do that don't fit those categories, and what can we learn from that? How can we incrementally improve the model based on empirical data? And the irony is that, it's very hard to get funding for projects like that, even though we are in a situation where we have trillions of dollars parked in EU or German or US government bonds at almost zero interest rate, just parked. And yet there's no money for things like that really could make a difference. This is really, I think, at the end of this conference, in the final session, we really need to consider how we can mobilize some of that dead money to actually count. Okay. But Benno, you wanted to make a comment.
Yes. No, I just want to.
Okay, Lucilla, did you want to?
No, I just want to make a comment on the three other ones. And
I think Benno's been waiting for a while, but we'll come back to you.
I think it's very important, the point Carlos mentioned at the end of his statement, that fits very well to all the other statements that have been made before. I think it's very important to see that big parts of UN sustainability programs are linked to a mechanistic worldview. If you take the ideas of climate change, they really believe somehow that the world is a big machine and that you have to push certain buttons, and if you push the right buttons, the machine will do everything that the outcome will be that we want to be, that the outcome is. This is absolutely, I would say, I can't use the word I'm thinking just now, I keep it for me. But it's important to see what Melissa said, what Carlos said, and also Luis made, and Lucilla, and pinpointed by Hartmut. The SDGs are the outcome of that kind of thinking. And if we take the approach of bottom-up, the bottom-up approach serious, then really have to mobilize the competences of the everyday people around the world. They know about their situation very often much more and better than a scientist is coming from another continent or from another distant place. And that's why I think, and I think Luis and Melissa pointed to that implicitly, that what I call the subjective perspective in the social sciences and humanities and the qualitative approaches are fundamental to understand, first of all, what the situation for the people themselves is and what they would do to find a solution, and then talk with them. So empowering local people to do good things instead of following pathways that have been developed by people that have absolutely no idea about the specific consideration in the cultural respect, in the social respect, but also in the natural respect very often. Yeah. So I think that's very important.
Exactly, and I mean the humanities and social sciences are perfectly placed to be the connective tissue between people at the local level, and also between maybe the business community and government and the science, especially the natural science. And we are well placed to connect these different sectors. And we in turn need to be empowered to do that. I think, Lucilla, you wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on this. This Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals is a negotiated text. That's what it comes out. Yeah. Participatory process, and I have Melissa Leach next to me here on Zoom, and I'm not going to give you a lecture on participatory process. I'm too humble on this. But the participatory process was done in a way that only those who want to participate really participated. So if you do a search in PDF of the Agenda 2030 and search for the word humanities, you'll not find it. You find science, you find technology, you find women, you find all sorts of things. That gives you a reflection of actually who negotiated again the agenda and who fought for the agenda. So while the local level actions are important, I'm not saying those are not important, there is also an important task that needs to be taken by the social sciences and humanities community to make sure that humanities scholars, social scientists, artists are engaging. The art is not even mentioned in the process. Yes. The artists are called to do fundraising. Okay, yes. So it's important to influence this process, to comment on this process. In 5 years, maybe the word will be completely different. I don't know. My biological anthropology perspective see different scenario for the species at the moment. But if everything continues as it is today, in 5 years, they will start another process for another agenda, for another set of goals in order to forget the SDGs. So it's important that the community gets up and say, this is the outcome of a process that is lacking an input. Natural scientists are much more used to negotiated text than social scientists and humanities scholars. Thanks.
Okay. Though I would like to hasten to add that to the defense of the SDGs, that it is a consensus piece, as you said, and it's pretty much what we've got. And 190 something governments signed up to it. That's quite something, and a lot of work went into that. And we should make use of it. And it is like Louis said, you know, in a world where the socialization of a consensus understanding of things is lacking, it has some value. It's just that we need to flesh it out. And also, I think I wanted to say that we need to work with civil society organizations that are very, very cutting edge and have very good communication strategies. And I often feel that there's a lot of scientists also in those organizations like World Wildlife Fund or people like Avas or Get Up or all these sorts of platforms. But we need to work with them more closely. I think that they can assist us. Fatwa, you wanted to comment? Yes.
Yes, it's wonderful discussion. It's very exciting and very energizing. And I'd like to bring in that whatever we say about local is not local enough, at least not by the standards of ethnographers. And what I discovered recently, in the context of the changes that are taking place and our dependence now on social media and Facebook, which we started by being arrogant about it. This is not a device that I want to do. I'm a scholar and so on. I found that observing systematically something like Facebook and the behavior of people on the ground in response to, in addition, response to rules and commands from the top in the case of COVID, when the government says you have to mask, or we have distancing. I observe the people's responses to that rather than the rules. So I'm not talking about global, local. I'm talking at the local level, we're not local enough. So in Facebook, for example, you observe that if somebody posts something political, you get a few ticks and a few comments and it says something. But you say, my grandmother died yesterday, and you get like 300 ticks from people you never heard of. Oh, I'm sorry. And I said, do you know me? No, but I'm really sorry. You must feel hollow. I know about mothers and grandmothers. And it goes on, and you begin to see a pattern. You begin to see a systematic pattern. So I'm not talking about just casual things. I'm talking about a scientist or an ethnographer looking at a different source and using it not by, which adds to the production of knowledge by seeking knowledge, not through interviews and surveys, which are also excellent, but like reading those chats, they say a lot about the people, that they really want what is close to their being human.
Yes. Yeah.
They want to turn any abstract topic to a humanness topic. They want to relate to your father dying even though they don't know you or your father. That's really absolutely amazing. And let me just add one thing, because these on-the-ground observations are very critical for exactly the discussion that we are doing. In Egypt, when they told people in a village, there's a village, they catch somebody with COVID, immediately the police moves in and the health officials move in, quarantine, we have to take that person. Then they look and they find about 55 people coming with food and so on from the next village. And they tell him, no, there's quarantine. They said, what do you mean? They said, this guy is being taken to the hospital. He said, that's why we're coming, because he's being quarantined. We're his family. We're bringing food, and we have to be with him as he is going to the hospital. This is important information, that the officials are doing their job right. They are telling them to mask, and they are telling, because they are concerned about the transmission of the germ, the virus, which is a scientifically proven threat. But the people are responding differently. They are going and saying, we are family, we are their cousins in the next village. And they say, but we need to quarantine. You have to stay in your village. You can't keep us in your village. We are family. We have to bring this in. So what I'm saying is we can use these other sources other than civil society, other than the organizations on the ground. We go to the local through their organizations. No, we go to the people. But how do we get information? We resort to those who know how to do it, to the ethnographers, which is exactly why the natural science and human sciences.
Thank you, Fadwa. That only illustrates the sheer lunacy of trying to make societal change in a technocratic manner without knowing how society is actually constituted, what people's concerns are, what the trends are. As Lewis says, here, you have the individual asserting itself against institutions, and you can see in Facebook, people relish in sharing their personal individual concerns that matter to them most in the end. But I want to say it can be very frustrating to be listening to an exciting discussion and not getting your say. And I wanted to pick up something from the chat from Hermine Beer, who says, well, we talked about science communication, and we talked about reorganizing the research process. Doesn't that need to be fused, those two elements? Don't we perhaps need to do both at the same time? So anybody would like to comment on that?
Maybe Luis. Thomas, Luis is raising his hand.
Luis, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I had asked to say something which in the end relates to this, because I think Fadwa was making a very interesting point. And this relates to all the discussion about, are the SDGs doing something good or not? My feeling is the SDGs are the best thing they can do. So it's fine. We should never ask anyone to do what they cannot do. Institutions of the past and minds of the past will never produce the future. As long as they don't block the future, is already fine. And the two agendas produced by institutions from the past today are, on one hand, this erroneous understanding of sustainability. It's not only the SDGs. I think the model of the Brundtland report is wrong from the very beginning, from Stockholm onwards. So, okay, fine, but it is well intended. Okay, it's wrong. They didn't even understand how society and economics relate. But okay, they're well intended. It's going in the good direction. They're not my enemies. My enemies are those from the past that fosters xenophobia, that understand localism in terms of authoritarianism, in terms of thinking that the right to diversity is to put burqa on women. These are my enemies. So as I don't mix them up, I still think the people from the SDGs are my allies. What we need is not to be very clear on our concepts. And this means that, for example, the way to intervene in the SDGs or in STEM should not trying to change it, to turn it into STEAM or into adding a cultural SDG for the future. So this we must reject. It's better to have the situation as it is than to add some, let's say, mediatic topic on top of it, which will solve nothing. On the other hand, I think this relates to this question. which is, should we do outreach and research together? Yes, in the sense that if we want to intervene in transformative processes, we simply need to do it. And all of us have different levels of outreach, because if we have none, either we are very rich or we can't do research, because we need to convince some people to give us money for that, which implies a certain level of outreach. But I would also stress that the protection of research and science requires the right for some researchers to do research. This is one of the major threats today. It's behind very interesting and positive concepts like interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, and communication, and so on. We destroy the disciplines and we destroy research. We turn everyone into a loudspeaker, and instead of actually producing knowledge, we only reproduce knowledge. So we need to share things. As a strategy, in any case, for structures like SIPS, for example, I fully agree. I
Okay,
think,
I'll have to stop you there, Luis. I'm sure this conversation has been very lively. Thank you, everyone. We could continue, but we're down to our last 10 seconds. And we have this large clock here that tells us what to do. I think some of the themes we can pick up in the concluding session particularly, but also in the following one. So thank you very much. We have a short break now. Yep. How many minutes is it?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.